The next step on your family tree was occupied by your parents. Graham Gladwell, born in Otford in Kent, in England in the year 1934, and Joyce Eugenie Nation, born in Harewood in St. Catherine's Parish on the island of Jamaica in 1931. And there they are. What a lovely picture.
Yeah.
You said he looked like a Soviet spy?
He looks like
That's cold, man.
You know, it's just that 50s thing going on.
This is their wedding day, obviously, in 1958. Your mother was born and raised in Jamaica. She met your father when she came to England to attend university. And at the time they married, interracial marriage was still illegal, of course, in many American states. Although it was legal in England, it was still, of course, pretty rare. What have you heard about your English grandparents' initial reaction to your parents' marriage?
Well, I think that they were a little bit taken aback by it. It wasn't, as I understand it, and understanding I'm getting all of this sort of secondhand, it wasn't, they didn't bar the door, and they didn't, but I think they had grave reservations about what it would be like to be a mixed-race couple in England in the 50s. You know, they were, I think they really thought, I mean, I think as I recall my mother telling me once, one of the things that my grandmother said to her was, think about the children. They were thinking about this prospect of having mixed-race kids and what they would have to go through in school. But also, you know, it's, you know, my grandparents are, when are they born? They're born at the beginning of the 20th century. A very different generation with very different attitudes about race, and this would be, this would have been a shock. But to their credit, they got over it. You know, that initial reservation faded, and so they sort of came to accept the marriage.
And your Jamaican grandparents?
As far as I know, delighted. I mean, who wouldn't want their daughter to marry my father? I mean, that's a very different attitude in Jamaica. The idea of a mixed race couple is, you know, it's been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, it's not news, and given the kind of prevailing attitudes about color, as you know, it's an upgrade, right? If you can bring in a little whiteness into the family line, it's all good. So I don't think there was any great. Also, you know, on a non-racial note, I mean, one of the arguments that my parents made, both explicitly and what they felt that they had much more in common than not. They thought of themselves, if you forget color for a moment, their backgrounds are astonishingly similar. They come from these deeply religious, educated, middle-class parents who had, you know, very similar kinds of attitudes about the world and attitudes about education, and who were sort of quiet, thoughtful people. I mean, they're not absent color. They're sort of a highly compatible couple, you know.
Well, they're still married.
They're still. I mean, no. What I mean is, like, the two families are highly compatible. We wouldn't have raised an eyebrow about this were it not for the subtle shading of my mother's skin. So.
But how did you view your parents' marriage when you were growing up? I mean, the fact of their ethnic difference, did it visit itself upon you in any way, you and your sibs, or it was just neutral?
Well, like I said, it's not something I ever really thought about until I came down here. And I began to meet other mixed-race kids and became aware of, and they would talk about how in the context of America it was this kind of, when their parents got together, this kind of radical act. And only then did it dawn on me that, oh, this was something kind of unusual. I literally never, I can honestly say, I mean, I almost never thought about it. You know, it might have been different. Remember, my mother, as well, she's a product of a Jamaican educated class that was highly anglicized in that period. So my grandfather, my mother's mother, you know, he was reading the same books that my English grandfather was reading. My mother was taught she went to boarding school in Jamaica, got a scholarship to this very English boarding school, and was taught by proper English women who came from England to kind of impart the ways of the home country to the colonies, right? So she's a product of a very deliberate colonial strategy of anglicizing the kind of educated middle class.
Right.
And you still see, when you go, I sometimes go to Silicon Valley and I meet some Indian software entrepreneur, and he opens his mouth and he has an English accent, right? Or he has an English tilt to the way he speaks, and I have this shock of recognition, and I think it's the same system that my mother came from. So that's what I was picking up. As a child, I think I picked up a lot of that. There's another way in which my parents seemed to be perfectly suited. It didn't seem to be any kind of there was no intellectual or cultural discontinuity to me, it seemed, as a child. But you're looking at it through child's eyes, but it wasn't until much later that I began to understand the kind of subtleties behind their radical act.